Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brand John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
You know, over the weekend, the Gremlins get into the equipment and little weird stuff happens, and then I have to come in on Monday morning and fix everything. John, do I have the terrible life or what?
You don't. You have a wonderful life because you were in Garden Prairie at an event that I hope you tell us about.
It was a great event. It really was. The Darden, you know what? Darden Prairie is an interesting city in St. Charles County. I believe it's the newest city in St. Charles County. Don't know how old. I'm gonna take a guess, 20 years old or something like that. And a lot of good people there, you know. A lot of we did that event. We'll talk about that later on the show. But more importantly, we have the guy who, since we've talked on Friday, has gone through not one, not two, but three different John Combest reports. He did one Saturday morning, he did one Sunday morning, he did one this morning. He does one every single morning of every single day of every single year for the past 22 years. And we start the show off with John, who condenses all his tremendous number of things he has on his website into three important, the top three, so to speak. We bring along this guy.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what does he do?
Now on with the countdown.
Counts them down. And we start off with...
In third place,
A Kansas City content creator has something that Brad Hildebrand has been talking to us about for 10 months now. And that subject, Brad, beware of deer on the road. Brad, have you ever hit a deer with your truck?
John, I think I'm up to, with my cars, various cars, I think I'm up to 19.
Wow, Brad. Now, when you reach 20, is the punch card full and you get to go to Department of Conservation and get a free gift?
No, I ended up in the hospital once over. I hit a deer going about 80 miles an hour, which don't do that ever.
Yeah, I won't plan on it. And if you follow the tips that are brought to us by KCUR today. Now, Brad, I think a couple interesting points here. There was a spokeswoman from MoDOT who talked about it, and then a gentleman from the Department of Conservation who talked about it. But, you know, they also talked to a woman from Kansas, who suggests that if it's unavoidable, or if it seems unavoidable, that you're better off to hit the deer than to swerve. Now, do you follow that recommendation?
Matter of fact,
try to swerve?
I once again, here we go. This goes way back to my days in the police department, and I believe it's still taught that way when they teach them, the police officers, when they go through academy and they teach them their driving techniques. They teach them to, if you know it's going to happen, square up and hit it. Essentially, try to hit it as square as you can in the front of the vehicle. In other words, put that deer right on the center crease of the hood, if you have a center crease of the hood, and hit it square. Because statistically, they say there's more people injured and killed by avoiding the deer, swerving off and hitting something else, or going into traffic and hitting another car, or hitting a tree or something like that, that you're better off just hitting the deer.
Yeah, that's what this article seems to suggest. So just a couple numbers I would throw out here. There were more than 3,000 crashes in 2023 involving deer. And of those collisions, there were more than 400 injuries and 4 fatalities. And then the woman from MoDOT did the numbers, and she says a deer strike occurred approximately every 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Yeah,
and of course, it's many of them are this time of year because of the mating season. I think you're more familiar with this than I am, Brad, when it comes to driving and hitting deer. But essentially, this article says that the male deer just go absolutely bonkers. It would be like being at the barn at Lucerne in the 70s when Brad was there. Just the men going nuts in a mating ritual.
I don't know about
that.
Now,
Brad, the gentleman from the Missouri Department of Conservation, his title is Urban Wildlife Biologist. I mean, that's a pretty good title, isn't it? Urban Wildlife.
Well, there's all sorts of crazy things with the urban wildlife thing. Remember, what was it been, about 10 years ago, the big controversy out in Chesterfield that they had so many, and I knew friends that lived in Chesterfield. They talked about they'd open up their curtains in the morning and there would be a deer sitting on their deck. You know what I mean?
I have deer in my backyard every day.
Right. Okay. And remember the controversy where they let the hunters into Chesterfield, but the bow hunters, remember they
Only bow hunting.
only bow hunting. Remember, do they still do that?
I don't know. I don't think that that's still a thing. And I remember this was a controversy in Town and Country as well, Brad.
Right. And you know, if you get the guys on here, the hunters on here, which, and it's not BS. The problem is when you get into an urban environment, the natural predators aren't there. And, you know, there's a balance in nature, as much as some people don't want to admit that, but there's a balance in nature. And you get into a certain area where the deer overpopulate and they have trouble surviving. And, you know, in this case, they cause problems, they cause traffic accidents and stuff like that. So as much as the PETA people go, oh my God, you can't, you know, bow hunt their deer in Chesterfield, they're actually doing the deer a favor. I know that sounds cruel. I mean, because you could say, well, what if you decided you were going to go into an area where you go, oh, look at all these old people playing pickleball. You know, we're just going to get rid of them because of the fact they're not productive anymore because they're all retired, and just have the bow hunters go and get them. People, oh my God, it's terrible. But you know, once again, it's Maslow's theory hierarchy. You know, I got in trouble for saying this. I guess it's been about a month ago. I never brought this up. I talked about how we're on the top of the food chain, and I had somebody sent me a very nasty text about the fact, by the way, 314-280-8880, that is my cell phone and my text number, about the fact that we are not the top of the food chain, that we should not be as braggadocious as saying, well, we're on top and everything else is below us.
Well, who's the top of the food chain?
Well, it wasn't that we are in the top. We share that top position. That we are like co-equals to like deer and antelope, and and there's that place in Chesterfield where the deer and the antelope play. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I didn't know that. Now, you know, last week in Jefferson City, this was a thing on the social medias. Scotty the Body, Scott Fawn, was having lunch at a place in Jefferson City. The name escapes me right now. But a bunch of PETA people, literally people from PETA, were protesting this pork shop because of, I guess, with the fact that pigs end up being eaten when we eat pork. And anyway, Scott took a picture of them, and they were playing like loud animal sounds, the PETA people were. And PETA, of course, stands for people eating tasty animals. And anyway, Scott had some funny joke about it. And it was the same day that he was enjoying his delicious food at this Jefferson City establishment.
And so were they complaining about the food that was being served within? Was that what they were doing?
Yeah, they were complaining about the fact that people were eating animals.
Interesting. If you go back in history, if it weren't for once again, when we had settlers here in Missouri, in the area we're in right now, way back when, if it wasn't for them, killing animals, they would have all died. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, and once again, one of the big things, I know you're going to make a comment on this, but one of the big things that happened in downtown St. Louis on the Landing is what is now, I guess the Landing is coming back for the 14th time. But that was the big trading center where the steamboats would come in and people would come across the river and stuff like that. And that was where all the fur traders, the people were trading furs and beaver pelts and stuff like that. And all the oils that came along with the animals as well too. When let's not get gross, but that's what they would use. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Hey, listen, when you're on the hunt for good beaver fur, they're going to leave behind a little residue. I mean, it depends on if they're ovulating or not. The name of the restaurant was Sweet Smoke, Brad. Sweet Smoke BBQ. Scott said, after a tremendous barbecue lunch at Sweet Smoke, I came outside to see some city slickers with a van playing pig noises. City folks are some weird, and then I can't say the word, but it was like son of a gun.
And you know what's interesting about this is if you went outside and looked at those people, I bet you any money they had leather shoes on.
Yeah.
And even to the point where there's this guy, I don't know if you've ever seen this guy, all these crazy people on the internet. There's this guy that loves talking to the PETA people. And they'll go like, well, I have a belt that my belt is not leather. My belt is synthetic leather. And he says, well, it takes 4 times as much energy to make a synthetic belt as it does to do a regular leather belt. So essentially you're polluting the atmosphere. I mean, once again, it's so crazy. You get these, these crazy weird people. It's like the people that complain about pollution, but yet they fly to various cities to protest. Okay, let's think about that for a minute. You know what I mean? It's like we talked about this last week. What was like $4 or $5 million that like the past 2 months, and since Kamala has been the official presidential candidate, and she's Miss Environmentalist, but yet what's her staff doing? They're flying all over the country in private jets, which is the most polluting transportation, per passenger mile traveled. That's the most polluting form of transportation. But that's okay. Just like, remember, I told that story back in 2000 when one of the reporters was questioning Bernie Sanders. Mr. Sanders, you're always complaining about polluting and things like that, and yet you fly all over the country. Aren't you being a little bit hypocritical? And he goes, what do you want me to do, walk?
I mean, he makes a good point. Now, Brad, as we go forward, you were just talking about urban wildlife. There's a whole lot of wildlife in urban areas, and sometimes it even leads to some legal charges.
Is that number 2?
It is.
Up a notch to number 2.
To steal a phrase from Post-Dispatch reporter Joe Holloman, sometimes the charges hit the fan. And that's what happened in Arizona for Bruce Franks. Now, Brad, you and I discussed this, I think, roughly 6 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about the trouble that Bruce Franks had been in. Maybe it was actually, as I look back at the archives, I think it was July that we talked about Bruce Franks. But Bruce Franks now has officially been charged with 10, count them, 10 felonies in Arizona. The Pinal County Attorney's Office charged him with 10 felonies, 9 of forgery, and 1 count of theft. So as you remember, as the alleged scheme went, his fiance at the time was in charge of the Maricopa County Democratic Party. So she told a mail contractor, or she told a mail vendor, MAIL, for direct mail, hey, don't tell anybody, but I want you to give this contract to my fiance. This is according to allegations. Bruce Franks apparently got around $25,000 to produce mail, have it printed, and then mail it. And as it turns out, according to, as I read this, Brad, he did none of that. He just kept the $25,000. And then as I read this, when he was busted, he gave the money back and said, hey, no harm, no foul, right? And the Maricopa County Democratic Party, counting people besides his fiance at the time, said, whoa. You can't just take $25,000, not deliver mail to voters, and then say everything's fine. So 9 counts of forgery and 1 count of fraud, Brad, for former state representative Bruce Franks. Remember, he was Superman, Brad. We all totally fell for that Superman gimmick, remember?
So was this like a campaign piece he was supposed to mail? Was that what it was?
Yeah, the Maricopa County Democratic Party. I'm guessing as I read this and in other pieces, previous pieces, they had like get out the vote mailers in the weeks before the election, where they would hit their entire list of, and Maricopa County is huge. That's Phoenix. And so they had a ton of mail. Obviously $25,000 worth of mail will get you a lot of pieces. So anyway, we'll see what happens with Bruce Franks. And then the Joe Holloman piece lays out all the other challenges. You might remember there was a thing where he pretended to do he had a taxpayer-funded job agency that he had a job at, and he allegedly forged documents there. And then right before the TV story hit on Channel 4, he resigned from the legislature, and he's bounced around the country for a while. So, I think people who, for some reason, would have bought into the whole I'm Superman, I'm a rapper called Oops, everybody believe in me. I guess if you bought into that, you're surprised by this.
Well, his claim to fame was he became prominent during the Michael Brown riots. And then the interesting thing, which once again, and I talked about this we talked about this before, and somebody says, I can't believe you keep bringing that up about Bruce Franks and the election. Well, they always talk about there's no election fraud. There's never any election fraud. He ran for state rep and he lost, but yet he contended there was election fraud. They investigated it and there was election fraud. Remember that case, John?
I do remember that. Now, as I read over the weekend, because I was reading some commentary about this over the weekend, Jane Duker had weighed in on this. So Jane was one of the people that I think it's fair to say didn't buy into this cult of personality about this Superman gimmick that Bruce Franks had. Jane pointed out that the fraud, as it was investigated, actually happened at the Board of Election, and it was a mistake at the Board of Election, and it didn't come from the Hubbard family themselves. Now, I think it's fair to say that Jane is not a fan or an advocate of the Hubbard, so I think she's pretty objective on this topic. Anyway, Jane's point was that the fraud didn't necessarily come from the Hubbard family, as I read Jane's criticism. But we may be splitting hairs there, Brad.
Well,
you're right to point out that your larger fact that people say there's no election fraud. There was literally election fraud. An election, a new state rep came in when the previous state rep might not have been, or might have stayed there.
Well, the Mrs. Hubbard won the election, and he complained that there had been problems with the election. They investigated, and they did find it. And as I remember, the original accusations was that she was the Hubbard family owned a lot of apartment buildings, and the accusation was that her people were knocking on doors and going, "Hey, do you have a?" Or they were encouraging people to get essentially a mail-in absentee ballot, and then they were going and getting the ballots and filling them out for the people. Hey, have you got a ballot? Yeah, have you filled out?
That sounds like a community service, Brett. And isn't that the general Democrat get out the vote operation anyway?
Right. Hey, you know what? Time's money, and you don't want to spend your time picking those people on the ballot. We'll do it for you. Just hand that ballot over.
Hey,
right.
you know, Brad, who's not going to be on the ballot? The star of story number one.
And that is?
The number one.
The Columbia Missourian has a nice profile today of outgoing Congressman Blaine Luetkemeyer, formerly of the 9th Congressional District, now of the 3rd Congressional District, talks a little bit about his life, his career, a retrospective. Brad, as we've talked about extensively, Bob Onder will be filling that seat in Congress. And Blaine says something interesting here that probably surprises some people. Blaine has absolutely zero interest, he says today, of being a lobbyist. He doesn't want to do any government consulting. He doesn't want to do the, cool your heels for a little while and then go get a lobbying contract in D.C. He's 72. He says he's going to spend time with his family and make up for a lot of the time and just kind of tend to his farm in St. Elizabeth, Brad. So we have an outgoing congressman who will not become a lobbyist.
And I have a 4-letter word for him.
Does it have to do with your rant about retirement?
It starts with a W. You know what the word is?
Work.
Wimp. Dude.
Oh, and why is that?
Keep working. Don't give me this, I have to spend time with my family. Your family doesn't care about you anymore because you're never around to begin with. So just keep doing what you're doing. You know what I mean? I mean, just keep, glad-handing people, going to luncheons, which, by the way, I've met him a couple times at various luncheons and stuff like that. Seems like a very nice guy. Once again, go back in history. I mean, once again, we've got a guy who's running for president who's, 77? I mean, he spends lots of time with his family. You don't need to retire from public life. I don't get it, John. I really don't. But that's just me. I'm weird. I'm demented. There's something wrong with me.
That's just you. And you know what? I think there's something to be said, Brad, that we haven't discussed much on this show, but it's the idea of people who turn necessity into a virtue. You know what I mean?
Is that a cut at me?
No, Brad. It's not about you at all. I'm just saying that there are a lot of people that are working in their 70s who have to be working, and then they turn it into, well, I'd never be one of those people who would retire. That's not me. It's like a guy with a fat, harpy girlfriend who's like, I don't want a beautiful woman who adds benefit and value to my life. No, I look at the content of her crappiness. That's what's important to me. I'm better than you guys. I like ugly, harpy, fat women, but it's their necessity. He can't get an attractive woman who adds value to his life, who's pleasant. So he looks at his unfortunate predicament and says, This is a virtue, actually. I like women's personality when they're fat and harpy. You get what I'm saying, Brad? So there's some people in their 70s who can't afford to retire, who pretend that it's a choice and say, oh, I'm going to keep working till I'm dead because I want to.
John, it's a good thing we're not on Westplex 107.1 because Westplex 107.1 has a predominantly female audience.
According to you, and you've never actually done a demographic study, you've never actually come out of pocket and paid for that study. You say it does because you play pop music, but you don't know that. If an advertiser come to you and said, Brad, what percentage of listeners are female, you couldn't prove it to them.
Whereas with this station, I can prove the fact that almost every talk station in the country is 85 to 95% men. So when you say your comments about women like you so nicely do all the time, you're only offending 15% of our audience, and the other 85% are going, yeah,
incorrect,
John.
Because the women who listen to our show are not wildly overweight and harpy.
Ladies, you can text me directly as what you think of what John just says, 314-280-8880. I will read your text on the air. Okay, it is time for us to take a break. We will be right back.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?